everybody. My name is Christa of Practical Astros, and I'm here with my friend Kira. I'll let her introduce herself and her qualifications, but we're here to talk about the 3 decans of Aquarius. It's Aquarius season as of last night, this morning.
Yeah,
The sun is close enough to Pluto that I can say we're talking with the conjunction in mind overhead of us. So, Kira, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience and share any Aquarius qualifications that you care to share on the front end? We can talk about it throughout the episode too.
sure. Yeah. So I'm Kira Ryberg. I'm a professional astrologer. I come from a more like Hellenistic background. And I've been, I don't know, this is like, I was joking to Krista that this is like my worst nightmare is introducing myself because I have a son in Aquarius. So please don't make me talk about myself. But yeah, I've been practicing astrology professionally for about 4 or 5 years now and teach electional and natal and do all of that good stuff. And my Aquarius qualifications are easier to talk about. Those are my sun, my moon, and my chart ruler, Mercury, and my midheaven. So I'm Aquarius 2 and Aquarius 3 between all of those placements. So I'm pretty stacked up in the Aquarius department besides that first decan.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I'm going to share my screen and move some things around so that we can look at the cards that we're going to talk about. So I'm going to put you over here so I'm not just like staring off to the side. Um, all right, so these are the 3 Rider-Waite-Smith cards that are associated with Aquarius. We have the 5, 6, and 7 of Swords. The 5, 6, and 7 of any are the fixed element or the fixed signs of that element. So Swords are air. We have the 5, 6, and 7 here. So these are the Aquarius cards. Now, in the Golden Dawn tradition, Rider-Waite-Smith, that era, they associate the star card with Aquarius, which I love, and we'll talk about the star card throughout this. But these are the 3 cards that are associated with the 10 degrees of the 30 degrees of Aquarius, the 10 for the decan 1, decan 2, and decan 3. So we're going to start with this one here. So you don't have any personal placements in this one here of Aquarius 1, but we can definitely talk about it. What is your first impression maybe we can start with the star. What's your first impression of the star as Aquarius?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting, like to me, I think of the water bearer, right, being as like
Mhm.
the sign of Aquarius, and then the star, you have a woman who's literally kneeled over with 2 jugs and she's pouring some water out. She's giving something back to the land, giving something
Mm.
back to her environment.
Mhm.
And I think there's something about that kind of reciprocal relationship. And the first, decan of Aquarius is co-ruled by Venus and Saturn, or Venus in one tradition and Saturn in another. So there is something that's like inherently relational about this.
Mm.
But there's almost like that stereotype with Aquarius. It's like you love humanity, but you, you don't necessarily love
Right.
humans, right? And I feel like there's something to be said about that with the star card. It's like this woman is all alone, and yet she's trying to give back. She's trying to pour into something. She's trying to bring generativity
Mm.
into whatever it is that she's, trying to do. And then I don't know, for me, the star card is always just like it's the star, right? Like there's
Yeah.
kind of like this beautiful element to it that almost feels antithetical to knowing that like the sun is in detriment in Aquarius, but you
Mhm.
then have this perspective that I think can only be granted when you're on the outside looking in.
Yeah.
And that there is like a star power that comes from that, from being unique, from being different. And that's kind of what comes to mind when I think of the star card. What about
Yeah.
you?
Well, I love so in the process of the major arcana, the star immediately follows the tower card. And we in the card we see a nude female form with 1 foot in water and 1 foot on land, and she's got 2 jugs or containers of water that are one is being poured or being sucked up from the pond, and like she as the conduit is like pouring it out into the ground next to her. The star just as like the face of the pure unadulterated goddess. I like that
Mm,
as just the channel of connection. I mean, in the sky, the constellation Aquarius kind of like pours into Pisces. But just as like the image of the Aquarius sigil, it's like these little water waves, but they can also be just channels of wind. And that's something that's
mm,
come up a lot for me. Like the idea of air signs. Air just as a word feels kind of stagnant. It's like air just exists. It's suspended. but wind is like all is movement. And to me, that like
Hmm.
that's what I associate with air placements, is not a stagnant filling up all corners, but like a movement across things, of like a agitation of the idea of music and voice and these all this stuff. It's integrated into every corner, but it's not stagnant. It's like the wind signs really do kind of create that agitation to cause us all sorts of trouble and all sorts of beauty simultaneously. And the star, it's so watery, and people think Aquarius is a water sign because it's the water bearer,
Hmm.
but it's really just that connection. And all of the sword cards in tarot have an element of water with it. I mean, there's water so much through it, almost as much as the cups, the water suit. And I just feel like there's this blend between the water and air, that water is that kind of emotional containment, but the air is like that princess and the pea agitation to like get us more
Mm.
things that we want a little bit more because we care about stuff. So it's like this, it's inextricable from water, which on the surface I don't necessarily associate air signs and water signs together, because like air is vata, it's more intellectual, and water is more like that emotional reservoir. But I think the star kind of blends the two, because she is, it's like less about her body and more about her mind. It's about
Hmm.
the intellectual connection that she's making, but she's still playing that role of being the connector, of being in those two worlds. And we'll talk about Saturn definitely, because Saturn traditionally rules Aquarius, and the idea of like Saturn being that limit or that boundary, and the Capricorn expression is like, just like, this is where you stop. But it's like
Mm.
Aquarius kept going as on the other side of that fence of like, well, this is what it looks like from the outside. And there is definitely like an outsider vibe to Aquarius, but also to this particular spread. And so now we look at the Empress, which is Venus. How do you reconcile Venus being the decan ruler of Aquarius one? Because it's a little tricky at first.
Yeah, I think what I always think of is that Venus and Saturn are like better friends than we think they
Mm-hmm.
are,
Yeah.
like Saturn exalts in Venus's sign of Libra. Venus does quite well in Aquarius. She has that decan, she has a bound, there's overlap
Mm-hmm.
there. She actually co-rules two decans, which we'll get into later. So she has her kind of, tendrils all over
Mm-hmm.
Aquarius. And I think there's something to be said about with this decan, or with like Venus, being there, is that one, Saturn is much more concerned with relationships than we give him credit for. And
Mm-hmm.
two, there's something Saturnian about the nature of relationships, especially those that are long lasting, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
Saturn wants to see things that are going to stand the test of time. And any relationship is necessarily going to have ups and downs and difficulties, which Saturn can speak to. But
Mm-hmm.
also, you have to have that for the love to be there, for it to grow and to flourish and to nurture, right? There has to be kind of those two sides of it, of the willingness to show up, do the hard work, be there even when it feels difficult, be there even when there's distance. And then also the Venusian element of like, yeah, and we're doing that because we love each other, because we're committed to each
Mm-hmm.
other. And that can show up in friendships, that can show up in romantic relationships, that can show up, between a parent and a child. Like there's so many different ways that that can manifest. And so I think when we're considering Venus's role in like Aquarius one, or with the Empress card, it's like you're all of a sudden being forced to focus on that relationality aspect, and that kind
Mm-hmm.
of the merging of Venus and Saturn in a really
Yeah.
inextricable way. And I just, yeah, I'm constantly thinking about their relationship, and how, one, they're on different sects. Like we wouldn't expect them to be
Mm-hmm.
friends, right? One's a benefic, one's a malefic, and yet they kind of need each other in a lot
Yeah.
of ways, and I think to do the Aquarius one thing of leaving, right? Leaving something behind is like what I really associate with this deck. And you have to have like a passion or a yearning or a wanting, a craving to go out and find something new, right? And
Mm.
that's the Venusian element to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's an idealization of Venus as well. It's like
Mm.
the Empress card, we have like a fully clothed, very decked out, female form with stars at her crown. She has like all of this fertility and abundance and flowing water like behind her, and the wheat at her feet. And she's got comfortable, cushions. And it's it's like, in order to get those, we have to imagine it first. They don't just appear, right? And
Yeah.
so the air quality and the discerning quality of Saturn helps us define and crystallize exactly maybe what we don't want first. And I can
Mm.
see the Five of Swords, because fives are like just conflict, they're associated with Mars, of like
Yep.
there's something to be overcome. And in order to idealize that beautiful print that the Empress card is wearing, we have to kind of decide, I don't like this print. It's like that cutting away and that discerning influence of Saturn is like helps us find the form of the Venusian beauty. Something that you mentioned about like the different sorts of relationships and how Saturnian relationships really are, especially ones that we want to be long lasting, is that relationship of mother and child, and that really spoke to me, just kind of looking at these cards of being a mom. There, love isn't expressed always as like cuddling and nurturing. Sometimes it's like
Mm.
really saying no, and like, you don't understand yet that that is bad for you. And I'm going to
Mhm.
do that, the kind of cold thing of saying no to you and protecting you, and creating the space between you and what I know will cause you harm. That is love in a way that maybe isn't understood in the moment. And sometimes you don't know that until you become a parent yourself, of like what that is. But that kind of cold Saturnian Venusian, um, uh, uh, I don't know, defiance against what is classically considered an expression of love. Love is also saying no to things and creating that space around it. And I think that that's kind of a, when we think of like, why is there a decan ruler in any place? Often it's because that ruler has something to bring to that sign, to teach it something, or to merge and to fuse. And yeah, I appreciate Venus here blending in that kind of cool Aquarian air way to help us define the things that keep us safe in order to have that long lasting sort of relationship. And also just the merging, like the nature of Venus is to kind of merge and synthesize. And there is a synthesis with the water that she's pouring,
Mm.
in the star card. So I think that they blend well. And also just the spread of these three cards, the water coming out of the Empress's forest kind of bleeds into the placid pond of conflict behind these characters, and then ends up in the pool of the star. I like that there's that flow, that emotional undercurrent that kind of speaks to the conflict that the Five of Swords has. Can you speak specifically on the Five of Swords? Can you describe it? Like, what do you think is happening in this scene?
Yeah, I mean, in the card, we have three characters. There's two that are kind of off in the background who are turned away, and there are swords laying at the main character's feet, or at least the one who is closest to us,
Mm-hmm.
holding two swords in one hand and another on the other. And he's kind of looking back, and he almost looks like a little like self-righteous to me, like he's kind of like, like, look what I did,
I got your swords. Yeah.
Yeah, like I got your swords. And I think to me, there's cloudy skies in this image. Like there's a lot of things that are symbolizing that there's conflict at play here, right? And
Mm-hmm.
like you said, fives are inherent to Mars because that is Mars's number. And so that kind of fuses into this where all of a sudden we have a conflict of air, a conflict of communication, a conflict of different interests, right? And I think that really shows up in this card and in this. It reminds me of what you were saying about how you have to know what you don't want to know what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like sometimes you have to enter into conversations with people to realize, like, oh, I don't like this person very much, or I don't agree with this person very much. You don't know that until you've really sat down and had a conversation. And then, all of your differences come to the table and you realize, what do you want to fight for? What do you not want to fight for? Do you want to be right? Do you want to be, what was the goal there? And so I
Yeah.
think this card oftentimes speaks to kind of a clash of ideas, a clash of interests. And one person feeling like they are the winner and that they can walk
Mm.
away feeling like, oh my God, I got it all. And then, other people being kind of hurt by that or turned away by that, rejected, dejected. We don't see the expressions on their faces, but by the way that they're standing, especially the character in the far back, it almost looks like they're
Mm-hmm.
bent over crying a little bit. And, sometimes to be able to say your piece, to be able to feel like you've won, there has to be like a loser, which feels
Yeah.
very martial to me, and that five kind of quality here. But then we bring it back to air, we bring it back to Aquarius, and it's all about the ideas, the communication, and how sometimes that's a very delicate thing. And, even in any relationship, right? Like you have to be able to navigate conflict in a
Mm-hmm.
healthy way to have a long lasting relationship. It's part of the deal, right? Like, I don't think anyone who's been in a long term relationship of any kind could ever say, we've never had conflict. We've never had a disagreement, right? Like, that's part of it. It's how you choose to repair
That also
that,
sounds very boring.
yeah, yeah. It's like, I guess we just agree forever then,
Yeah.
like, you
Okay. Are
know?
you my sibling? I mean, why are we even married? Yeah. Yeah. There's something even
Yeah.
about the quality of those clouds. It looks like the winner, right? Because this is like a winner versus losers card in a way.
Mm,
That the guy in the forefront has got all the swords like at his feet and in his hands. The clouds look like he just like helicopter his way through the clouds. Like he just
he
destroyed
slashed it.
everything. He slashed it. It's like he like overproved his argument, which to me, swords can kind of be that of like just overthinking things or like churning through. And we'll see it a little bit more, especially in the Seven of Swords, of just
Mm,
like over complicated, like just destroying everything with an argument. This is like a really passionate argument that just kind of destroys all the way around. And sure, you won, I guess, but like at what cost? And I think that
mhm.
Venus here can then step in and say like, well, maybe that's not a way to fight. Like here's a more peaceful way. Because I think ultimately Aquarius has like it's it has a peaceful vibe. It is kind of it's more assertive and more masculine. You know, it has kind of more of that yang solar, energy. It's air, but it ultimately feels like we're doing this so that we can have peace later on. And I think that Venus is here to kind of show how to maybe not repeat things or do it a better way. The idealization of Aquarius with Venus here just really kind of sings, but it's like post war or post argument or post conflict. I don't know that necessarily she is there. She's helping in the midst of it all. It looks a little bit like
Mm.
an aftermath in a sense.
Yeah, yeah. I think of like the entire sign of Aquarius, the different decans, like it's like this journey of a trip or
Mm-hmm.
like leaving home, especially like, and in this first one we almost see like what what made you do that?
Yeah.
Like what
Yeah.
spurred you into leaving, right? And I think like this is it's the conflict, right? It's the feeling of even if you've won, you're the outsider, and that
Yeah.
there's all of those kind of complications that come up with that. And usually it's relational, which is where Venus shows up as well, is like, I find a lot of times with people who have strong placements in Aquarius one, like they don't always feel accepted by their family, by their
Mm-hmm.
hometown, where they come from. Like there's all of these conflicts that have come up. And then it's almost like you see this guy who seems almost like very self-satisfied despite the conflict. And he's like, well, watch me then, and I
Mm.
think people with Aquarius one placements, like they do tend to say like, all right, I'm going to go out and I'm going to make it happen for myself, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to follow the things that I do love about the things that I do want. And that might piss some people off in the process, but also that's my journey.
Mm-hmm.
And there has to be almost like a severing to be able to even get to the place where you can seek out something new, seek out something that supports the unconventionality of Aquarius, like that it inherently has, if that makes
Yeah, and
sense.
yeah, and it's also Aquarius is fixed. It's a
Mm,
solid sign. So it's like there is that stubbornness. I know that Taurus gets the stubborn label, but all the fixed signs have that
totally.
talent and curse of fix. That's their job is to sustain. And I like that Aquarius has that. I think it's partly how it gets that outsider, reputation of like of having this idealization and then having the fortitude to stick with it, of appreciating the journey of like it does mean kind of the cost of some relationships because I myself am going to be my own advocate and move forward through this. And but I think there's also an appreciation of like Aquarius has the compassionate how do I say this? They appreciate other people being outsiders too. It's not like it's just about
Hmm.
themselves. It's like they appreciate when they see people doing things that are outside of norm. Like David Lynch just passed away. And even though he's Capricorn sun, he has this total Aquarian vibe to him. It's like
Mm,
he portrayed his art in a way that was unique to him, which made him stand outside the norm. And there's an appreciation of people doing their own thing, singing in their own voice, like being their authentic weirdo selves, that has kind of that Aquarius celebration to it. And that I think that the fixed nature of it really does assist here, just to be able to, despite maybe being an outcast or a refugee or an outsider or a weirdo or eclectic or whatever, that you have that like you have that fixed wind to be able to keep you on your own unique weirdo path that makes you stand outside of most people that conform to whatever is safest or more readily acceptable because it's like what we're used to, you know?
Yeah. And then that desire to support other people who are doing the same thing. It's like,
Hmm.
oh, I'm weird and you're weird. Cool. We're both weird. Like we can
Yeah.
both do our weird shit, you know?
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
I think that's also how we can bring Venus back in is like there's an appreciation for what is different, for what is outside those societal norms, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like we see that kind of Venus Saturn thing of like, oh no, I love the people on the outside, or I love people
Mm-hmm.
who break with that conventionality or those societal norms and the status quo. It's like there's an appreciation for that because it's so inherent to Aquarius one that it's like you
Yeah.
see other people doing it and there's yeah, a deep appreciation. I think that someone else is walking to like the beat of their own drum,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and seeing, oh wow, if they can do it, I can do it too. It's both inspiring and, you know, kind of a supportive like environment. I often think of people who leave their hometown where they maybe are like the only queer kid and they feel
Mm-hmm.
really misunderstood. And then they go move to LA or something. And all of a sudden there's like a big community of people that are just
Yeah.
like them. And they've found their place now, but they only did that by leaving and by feeling outcast and by feeling kind of shut down or negated for who they are. Right. And that causes them to go seek relationships, the Venus thing, with
Mm-hmm.
other people who are different or other people who are, you know, just doing life by their own rules and not by what society tells them they should be doing.
Yeah. I think I first heard the phrase chosen family from an Aquarius. And I remember
So
being
fitting.
kind of shook because Aquarius is my fourth house, so you know that's my root. But I
Mm,
remember hearing that and being like, "That's fascinating! Like you can choose your family. Like where have I been this whole time? Like in kind of like that fixed nature, but chosen family of like finding your tribe or like finding people that you align with and being willing to cut away maybe the blood connection if it's not, you know, sustainable or healthy, you know, and
hmm
having kind of that cold quality to then find your you know, because lineage can be bloodline or it can be beyond that, you know, so like finding
Totally.
that lineal connection. You know, thankful for the swords to have it. Let's move on to Aquarius 2, which is the
hmm
kind of the middle of this. This is it's called Lord of Earned Success and Lord of Science, and I like science just because Mercury's here, the magician
Yeah.
and the star. Out of all of the cards, this I think is the easiest one. People don't recoil when they get this one. They're like, okay, like I think it's like feels more manageable, which you
hmm
know feels mercurial because Mercury is like our friend. He's there to help. He's the friend of man, as the kind of the messenger between these worlds, which he definitely feels like in this card. It seems like Mercury is the character in the boat. So the description of the card is there's two cloaked figures, looks like a parent and a child, or at least a younger person and an adult that have their backs to us, and they're sitting in a kind of a shallow boat. It's considered shallow because the person standing up in the boat has a long pole, and you would kind of push the boat along shallow water. So it's like a ferryman between, you know, maybe there's a lake and there's a town on either side, and you're going from one place to another, which kind of furthers the story of leaving your hometown or being a
hmm
refugee or kind of going across some waters, but they're still carrying all their swords upright in that boat with them. And so the character at the end, that's kind of in the forefront of the card, holding that long pole, pushing it forward, feels to me like I always have associated like that is Mercury, that is Hermes,
hmm
like pushing us and being the ferryman that I always associate him with. But what's your sense of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about that middle part of the journey where you're neither here nor there. So
Mhm.
there's like this very strong liminality that comes into this space, which is so mercurial, right? They are both and they are neither or. They don't belong to either sex. They're neither
Yeah.
feminine or masculine, right? They deny the binary. And I feel like that's what we see in this card is like we aren't here or there. We are in the in between. And I think that there's a really like juicy quality to this deck. And of course, I'm very biased based on my placements here, but that allows you to navigate those in betweens and to be the ferryman for other people once you've kind of gone through some of these journeys yourself. And I think there is that process of the Five of Swords leading us into the Six of Swords, and maybe you have to leave and then go on a 1 or 2 journeys until you kind of get the lay of the land. And then it's like,
Hmm.
now I know and I can steer and I can direct to the next place that I want to go. But the point of it isn't the destination. The point of it is that journeying that happens here. And I think
Yeah.
that's kind of what I always think about with this card or with this decan is like there's an attempt to blend two sides of something together,
Mm.
where you came from and where you are going to next.
Hmm.
But we don't quite know what's coming next, and we're not quite in love with what came before. So there's hope and there's kind of fear and there's,
Yeah.
all of these like complicated emotions that I think can live here that really pertain to that air quality, that Mercury quality of thinking,
Hmm.
thinking, thinking. Like, am I going to be happy there if I wasn't happy here? And what does it mean if I leave? And what does it mean if I land nowhere, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like making your own in no man's land is how
Mm.
I think about this a lot of the time, and trying to become sovereign in a place that there is no sovereignty, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah. Last night I heard a Robert Louis Stevenson quote that says, to travel hopefully is better than to arrive. And that's what this card reminds me of. It's like, because you don't know what's on that other shore. And you hope that it's better than from whence you came. But like the journey itself, that middle point of this fixed sign, that middle point, that movement, it's like best to lean into hope because we can use our imagination or abuse our imagination for what lies on
Mm.
that far shore. But I'm curious, what are your thoughts just on the magician card itself and Mercury here, as because Mercury has an affinity with Aquarius, whether it's, it doesn't have necessarily traditional dignity, in a Hellenistic sense, but it definitely feels like it belongs here.
Yeah, I always think whenever that's the case, it's almost always triplicity is the
Hmm.
answer, and Mercury is
Yeah.
one of the triplicity lords of Aquarius. So we get it through that, not necessarily through the modern astrologers often say
Hmm.
that Mercury exalts in Aquarius, right? Either way you dice it, Mercury feels it as element in
Yeah.
Aquarius. And I think with the Magician card, you see this figure with like a dual-sided candle raised over its head and like an infinity sign above its head, and all of the different tools laid in front of it, right? There's a
Hmm.
chalice, there's a pentacle, there's a sword, there's a wand. And to me, it's almost about taking everything that you have, all of your tools, all of your knowledge, all your skill sets, and searching for something more, right? To me, the magician, magic in general, is trying to change your circumstances for some reason or another, right? To enact your will upon something so that
Hmm.
something might change. And I think change is inherent to Mercury, right? Like this is a planet that really enjoys that weirdness, that in between, that knowing
Hmm.
and not knowing. Like there's all of these there. And it's almost like the only way that we can really apply our knowledge is to do something with it, right? And to me, that's the act of magic. That is the
Yeah.
magician. Is like we're trying to make change and we're gathering all of our, forces to do so, all of our
Hmm.
different, tools. And so, yeah, I often think about it as a card of like really wanting to change your circumstances in some way and having the tools and skill sets to be able to do
Hmm.
that, but needing to almost like take that step forward and enact your will upon whatever it is to get where you want to be.
Which really fits into the Six of Swords card, because if we think of like why are you leaving and where are you going, it's because you need that change of circumstance. And we'll continue that circumstance with the next one because it's lunar ruled, and that's all about like,
Mm,
circumstance and that kind of the shifting of those tides. But I like the magician card here because we don't know why, these characters are going from one, why they're traveling across water, even just the duality of the beyond water looks still and the water up close looks very rough, so
mm,
hopefully moving to calmer seas. um but the magician card has the roses kind of trailing above, and the idea of sub rosa, of like doing things for secret reasons and maybe we don't understand them
mm,
initially. And to me, that plays into it of just, we don't understand why these people are leaving or where they're going. That's not our information, but Hermes has that information, and Hermes is helping them kind of move across. I like getting this card to remind myself that there are forces that are at my back, that there
mm,
are kind of angels that are guiding me, even if I don't quite understand, and that I still am going to carry all my thoughts with me. All those swords are like neatly, stuck in the boat with me, like they're not leaving, but that there's someone else that maybe I can just trust to kind of help guide me to calmer waters. That just feels comforting, and just that reminder that, you can call on guides, you can call on helpers, you can call on spirits, you can often just call on Hermes to come in and be like, I need your help right now. Can you help me get to a point where then I can take all these swords out and look at them in a different way, maybe look at them in a different light on a different land.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think about a lot that the swords are also kind of obstructing the view of the two people
Mm.
that are sitting in the boat, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
almost like all they can see is everything that they're thinking about, right? All of
True.
these different stressors or anxieties or, thoughts, ideas, but they still can't necessarily even see what's coming next. So they're
Mm-hmm.
forced to be very present in the liminal space and
Yeah.
hold all of those complications and complexities. And so yeah, I think it's just it's a strong card of journeying. And I mean, I have my Mercury in my midheaven and my sun here. So like this decan to me is me,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
a major way. It's like it's my chart ruler and it's my sun. And like I left home, like I live abroad now, like I've definitely gone on that journey. And I think a big part of it is almost like the feeling of like you can't run away from your problems, right? But you can
Mm-hmm.
try, but they're still in the boat with you,
Yeah.
right? And like you don't necessarily know what problems await on the other side either, right? There's going to
Yeah.
be new problems. And that doesn't mean that there aren't like new winds and beauty and all of the other things along with it. But it does to me feel like all of that shit you thought you were leaving behind is actually in the boat with you and you don't just get to like
Yeah.
peace out without it. Like
Yep.
it is a part of you. So that's something that I think about a lot with this card too.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, living in a foreign land, you have to learn a new language, and so you kind of have to start over. But you're still coming from your own context of your own language. So it's like you might abandon, the Five of Swords after that conflict. You might just say, bye Felicia to all those haters in the hometown, but you're still bringing like that language of bye Felicia to your next land, your next language. So I really like that. As Mercury, it's like, you're still going to contain everything that all your memories are still there, to bring to it. But maybe those memories can then, serve you. Sixes are, generally a little bit more peaceful,
Hmm.
especially after fives. But they're not without the memory of what you just battled. Um, what do you think about just calling it science? I mean, like if we just look at it from, it, coming from our modern understanding of science, how would you relate this card to just science as we know it today?
Yeah, I think that that's the problem, isn't it? Like, because our idea of science today has been greatly shaped by what we deem as scientific at this
Mm-hmm.
current moment in time. And I think back like the decans are so old, like one of the oldest things that we have in the form of astrology, right? And
Mm-hmm.
obviously the Rider-Waite-Smith deck came along far after that, but we see that in the depiction and these names that the Golden Dawn gave of like the Lord of Science. To me, it's drawing on what science used to be, which is innovation, right? It's creation, it's things that progress us forward in some way. It's shaped around ideas. And like astrology was a science, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
Abu Mashar's book is literally the science of the judgment of the stars. Like
Mm-hmm.
it was thought to be scientific. And nowadays, like if you said that to a scientist, they would probably get really, really mad at you because
Mm-hmm.
it's not scientific. And it doesn't need to fit this current definition of science to be valid, as I think we both know. But I feel like when we're thinking of the Lord of Science, to me, it's not just saying you're a scientific person. To me, it's saying you are a seeker. You are someone who is
Mm-hmm.
going to try to innovate, try to find new ideas, try to make things make sense. How do we bring all of these different pieces together to
Mm-hmm.
progress us forward and also take stock of where we've come from, right? So to me, it's a little bit more about that. And I think if we try to stick the modern idea of science onto this card, we really, really lose something in what
Yeah.
it's about, you know?
Yeah. There's I think it's the number one podcast now. It's the telepathy tapes. Have you listened to that at
Mm,
all?
I haven't, but I think someone just recommended it to me very
Yeah.
recently, so I got to get into it.
I love that it's the number one podcast right now. usurping some really shitty podcasts out there. But it's the idea of that it's focused initially on kids that have autism, and the telepathic power or abilities that they show. And the last one that I listened to was they set it up as they were like very traditional, scientific method, Western scientists that set up these tests of, autistic children and their parents, being able to read each other's minds and filming it from every direction and reducing all other sorts of reflections and sounds, and no ways for the clues to be able to give in. It's like to try to prove telepathy, even like hiring different crew members to like participate so that like they had no skin in the game, and proving, as far as we are able to observe, that telepathy is real. And maybe these children that have autism kind of have the capacity to access it maybe quicker or less distracted than we do. But I think about that as, sorry, I'll back up. So the last one was they did all of this research, and at the end of it, the documentarian was like, this is exciting. I feel like we proved it. And the main doctor was like, no one in the scientific community is going to accept this. Like, this is just because it's so outside of what we believe to be true. Even using their own methods, they're not going to accept this. And just by being a scientist and doing these experiments, they're shunned by their peers for doing it. And we see this all the time. I mean, that's not, doing things outside of the box. Like, that's how we grow, but it's met with discernment and met with scrutiny, met with skepticism, as it should be. I mean, like, if things aren't able to be challenged, then maybe they shouldn't, be believed immediately, right? But it got my attention listening to this last night and thinking about this card of okay, what is telepathy? It's connection, and it's using language in ways that maybe we don't assume are correct or what we're used to. But if you've been connected with other people, you can dream about them, or you can like assume something about them and then they call you, or I mean, there's ways that we connect that are beyond what we assume to be normal. And that can come in all sorts of different forms. And I like this card as like that connection piece. Hermes is a psychopomp. It's not the only psychopomp, but he is a psychopomp that can travel between worlds. And just because it's a world, like you and I are talking English over Zoom from different countries, we understand each other. We're using all sorts of mercurial technology to do that. But we can also connect in ways that are outside of this accepted format. And Aquarius feels particularly qualified to explore those areas of connection. We talk about AI a lot, with Aquarius, but I think that there's ways that are already inherently within us, like telepathy and dream work, and even just group meditation feels like Aquarius too. It's ways of connecting that are outside of what we assume. That I think, to me, that is science. It's observing those, and it's experiencing that, and it's challenging it, and it's talking about it. And we're I hope that the signification of the telepathy tapes being popular means that more people are open to those ideas, and maybe opening themselves up to the idea that they also might have the capacity for telepathy. So yeah, I wanted to throw that in. Here's your reaffirmation to like listen to it, because it's really beautiful and curious. And there's something about the word revolution with Aquarius, where people think of like, we think of like the French Revolution or the American Revolution. The word of revolution is like to return. It's to return to old ways, which is Saturnian, that might feel new because it's just been so long since we've done it. And for me, that internal telepathic connection feels very old. Like we already have had that before, and it just feels new now because there's a podcast about it,
Yeah. It's like how much we don't know about the brain, right? Like it's all these things that like they've been around forever, and yet we still like it's still a mystery, right? And having the curiosity, which is such a mercurial thing, to go out and question, to explore, to hypothesize, right? And create your own theories and ideas about how the world works, what your place is in it, all of these different things
Hmm.
is to me the essence of this card is like
Yeah.
there's a curiosity that was strong enough to get the person in the boat,
Right.
and there's a like inherent trust of like, okay, the ferryman is going to take me where I need to go next, even if I
Hmm.
can't see it, like the figure can kind of see at the very tops of the swords. It's like he
Yeah.
has knowledge of the where, of the where, and these people do not. And so it's almost like both you get the knowing and the not knowing that's present
Hmm.
in this card. And I think you have to have that to do everything that we were just talking about and that you were kind of explaining is you have to know that you don't know something to go seek
Yeah.
answers,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And if like the fool is like tarot is the fool's journey, but the fool is also very is air. And
Mm.
the fool knows enough to like be able to reach out that foot to step, but also doesn't know, and trust that that's going to be okay. I've been on this ride before.
Yeah. I've gone around the wheel a time or two.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so let's then move to the final decan of Aquarius 3. I love this card. Susan Chang calls it the banana in the fruit basket. If we line all
Mm.
the air cards up, this one seems out of place. But what's your do you want to spend some time just describing the card and then we can kind of start from the middle and move our way out?
Yeah, so there's a figure and he's carrying five swords. He has one foot outstretched and one kind of leaning behind him, and he's looking back at these two remaining swords that are upright. And to me, it's always this questioning that's present of like, should I go, should I go back? Should I go grab
Mm,
those swords? Should I move forward? There's kind of like you're in the new land, you've touched ground, but you're also still thinking about where you just came from. The
mm.
journey, the conflict, that five, that six are still very present in the card. And to me, I'm always thinking about this guy. He has bare hands, like holding the very ends of the swords, right? And it's like, well, if he makes one wrong move and drops all these swords, he's screwed. Like his hands are diced, And
Mhm.
to me, it speaks a lot to this quality of like how much can we carry? How much is ours to carry? How much should we just let go of? And when when and how do we come into the knowledge of being like, you know what, that's not for me anymore.
Mhm.
Even if it looks enticing, even if it looks like there's something to be gained. And so it kind of challenges the notion like, is more always better? Is
Mm.
known always better? Or do we move forward with less? And that's actually the thing that helps us progress.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think that there's just this quality of reaching and uncertainty that lies here. And, it's co-ruled by the moon and Venus, and the moon has that kind of uncertain quality about her, just in the sense that she's constantly changing. She's waxing, she's waning, she's applying to a new planet every couple of hours or so. And so she changes a lot. And I think that this card is one where we see that change taking place and the
Mm.
uncertainty that comes with change. Yeah, that's kind of what comes to mind when I think about this card.
Yeah, I mean, behind the character, it looks like a straight up Ren Fair, right? Just like
Yeah.
all these like wildly beautiful colored tents and flags, and but then that as a foil to like, what is he doing? Like, why is his body is kind of like sneaking away. I love his fuzzy boots and his fuzzy hat. Like he looks like an entertainer. And I think of like entertainers and politicians and actors that are kind of doing two different things at once. Like
Mm,
maybe like an actor is themselves as a human that has their own history, but is portraying a totally different character at the same time. And his body movement of like going from like towards the left hand side of the card while his head is moving towards the right just feels kind of like um, to be like to have two seemingly contradictory things being true at the same time, or to be conflicted about two things, to be of two minds, or to like be distracted. This is kind of like a maybe a, a, um, a multitasking to your own detriment sort of a card. I love the moon that she wanders because that reflects our own wandering. We all
mm-hmm.
don't operate in a direct linear sense. Like we wander around, we find ourselves in different places, and the complication of that. Like so, if we go with this outsider or traveler or refugee or this person that has had conflict that has left, that has traveled across, both placid and rough seas with some aid, and now they're on this new land. It's like figuring it out. Like when you move to a
Mm-hmm.
new country, there's a lot of figuring out, like, where do I go? I don't speak the language yet. How my usual brands are not in the stores. Like I have to like start all over, and I have to try all these different hair products because I can't find the one that I want. But then you get to discover so many other new things, but you're thinking about the ones that you would just like mindlessly reach to in your old hometown. You have to like figure it all out. It's like the social faux pas, like don't walk around in Japan eating ice cream cone, like eat it in the cafe. Just, you're going to get stares for being kind of a jerk for walking around and eating ice cream. Just like all these little things you have to learn. It's kind of messy, and you get wounded for that,
Mm-hmm.
for not knowing or for being distracted. When I pull this card, a lot of times I'm trying to do too many things at once, and I'm not doing any of them very well because I'm kind of like just distracted. Um, yeah,
I
that's
feel
my
so
sense.
red. I feel so red to filth right now because my moon is in this decade, and I'm like,
Yeah.
the multitasking to my own detriment thing is very true in my experience, as is everything that you were saying about moving to a new country, right? It's that one foot in and one foot out. And I took
Hmm.
this really great travel, like history of travel class in college. And my professor would always say that, when you go somewhere new, when you travel somewhere new, really what you're doing is you're learning about everything you value and think about your home. Like when you try new food, your comparison point is the food you
Hmm.
eat at home. So you're learning, like, do I like this new cuisine? Oh, this is maybe more spicy than what I usually eat. And so it's just this constant like learning and processing that's happening.
Yeah.
But it's all in the name of almost like self-discovery, which is side thing, but I call the ninth house like the house of self-discovery because it's where we go to
Yeah.
travel, and it's all of these different things to help us learn about ourselves. And I think this card almost like speaks to that quality of you've stepped foot somewhere new, you don't know what you don't know. And like you said, it's going to be messy and it's going to be weird, but you're going to learn a lot about yourself in the process, right? And I
Hmm.
think the moon is so intrinsic to who we are, right? It's our physical body and our emotional body. It's our memories and it's our mom. And it's all of these different things that when we put them all together, it's like a massive part of who we are in every
Mm.
single way. So when you're doing this, you kind of have to be in that space of, not fully knowing to be able to learn something new about yourself, to learn something new about the journey that you're on, the place that you're in, and how that all relates back to where you come from. And I think with this figure in the card, like he's looking back, even though he's in the new land, and he's thinking about what came before, or should
Hmm.
I go pick up those swords, or do I just let them lie, right?
Yeah.
Like, do I go back home or do I just continue forward in this new land and really try to assimilate into the new place that I'm in?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like a lot of emotional work, like taking the emotional work seriously too, because we
Mm-hmm.
have that lunar influence, but it's swords, it's air, it's that the kind of intellectual space, but just the emotional bandwidth to carry lots of things at the same time. I don't think that multitasking is inherently a fault. I think that the ability to pivot and multitask might be exactly what the day needs,
Mm-hmm.
and to be able to explore lots of things simultaneously. It's like cooking a big meal. You have to kind of
Yeah.
time things and understand like how things need to be put in the order they need to, and that takes a lot of mental energy. Like that show Bake Off, in Great Britain,
Mm.
it's like you want them to succeed, and you see like how much art and how much science is kind of blended of like getting everything right to converge at the same time. You have to have that ability to compartmentalize, which I think this card can help us with. Even if like the compartmentalization are very, very tiny little moments of time, little pockets of time, it's like, having a very busy schedule and just being able to be present in every single moment, even though you have lots of different varying kinds of appointments. It's a great talent, but it's work. This card has kind of like a trickster, like he's at a Ren fair, maybe he stole all those. Like, what's going on? Like,
Mm-hmm.
but beyond that, like it is an incredibly hard working card, which I think that Aquarius doesn't get enough credit for, of being very hardworking. It's like maybe you don't see it because it's air. You don't see it like Capricorn. Capricorn is very clear to remind all of us of how hard they work. And I think that that's needed. But Aquarius too also has that Saturnian fixed ness about it, and the mental work, the mental load that they're willing to accept and go forward is like an Aquarian. It's a compliment, you know, of like sometimes you might not be seen, but we do see how hard you are actually working.
I feel like I'm getting a reading right now with how how much all of this is just resonating with my moon place, and I'm like, wow, Krista. Yeah, no, definitely. I think that there's so much about that mental load, right? And like you said, in
Yeah,
Capricorn, we have the tangible, the material, the structure. We can see what you built because it's there.
right.
Whereas in Aquarius, it's the ideas, right? It's the innovation. It's the things that we can't necessarily see. And so how do we attribute something to that, right? It
Hmm.
becomes much harder. And that doesn't mean that the work isn't present, right? And I think
Yeah,
that's where you see this guy is like, should I take on more or should I not, right?
right.
I think it's like, am I going to get recognized maybe if I do or if I don't? And there's kind of that. I always see this with people who have placements here. Like one of my joking lines to clients, like you probably like take too many groceries in your hands, right? Like instead of trying to make
Pack
two
mule.
trips,
Yeah.
you're like, I'll just grab it all, right? And that kind
Yeah.
of quality tends to apply to the whole life. It's like, I'll just grab it all then. And then
Mm,
realizing like actually if I would have asked for help, if I would have just gone in two trips, like I would have been able to bring everything with me instead of thinking that I have to do it all on my own, all in one go. And so
yeah.
there's a weightiness to this, decan, I think, that comes from that Moon, Saturn, Venus thing of like Moon, Saturn it tends to be hard, right? Like it's the
Hmm.
stuff that creates heaviness and weight on our emotions, right? Like one of the hardest transits you could have is Saturn over your moon.
Yeah.
And so there is like that heaviness, but I think that heaviness often comes from wanting to take it all on, like you said, wanting to do all of the things and diversify and multitask, and then realizing, unfortunately, usually, like you can't do it all, and some
Mm.
things have to be put down, even when it feels like completely challenging to who you are to do so.
Yeah. I mean, I think about just the relationship between Capricorn and Aquarius because it's in Hellenistic astrology, they are both ruled by Saturn. So there's this kind of hilarious joke of like how long Saturn rules. It's like two signs simultaneously. And
Hmm.
like to be in like a Saturn CR period, it's like, well, guess what? You get to be in it again, you know?
30 years,
Ask
yeah.
me how I know. So like, but I think about the beauty in that of having an Earth Saturn like excavate all of this stuff up, and then the air Saturn fulfilling all of that's been revealed. And I think maybe that's why Aquarius doesn't get as much credit, is because we can visually see the Earth Saturn of what it provides, even if it's like really shitty lessons.
Yeah.
The Aquarius version of that, of fulfilling all that, is like continuing that Saturnine story. But then every time it comes around, it's changed, right? It's like we can see with our own eyes the Capricorn, but the Aquarius, it is, because it's air, it like can meet whatever is the moment. And so there's not a lot of tangible like proof or evidence or artifacts to Aquarius, because it meets that moment and then it goes away. And the capacity to meeting moments and fulfilling them, it's like you don't have a lot of evidence to prove it except your own memory of that. And I feel like maybe that's why it's harder to identify just the work that Aquarius, all of them do, but especially this one, the Aquarius 3. It's kind of like the capacity to meet moments and to keep going. It's like, I don't know, maybe with Pluto and Aquarius, we'll be able to kind of witness it, but in 200 and some odd years, we'll forget it again and
Yeah.
like have to relearn all those Aquarius themes. But I feel like it's kind of like Aquarius's time to shine during Aquarius season, to see all that Aquarius is able to handle and hold and sustain, and that kind of air, intellectual, mindful space, and to not forget it. I think the opposing sign is Leo, and it's like real clear to
Hmm.
like shine the star onto Leo and see like what a great performer you are, and how loving and warm and welcoming and fertile and all these things that that are the acceptable, like this is clearly successful. The other end of that, it's like some of the most successful people I know have Aquarius placements because it's that drive, and maybe not being bound by the expectation of being rewarded or being
Mm-hmm.
acknowledged kind of frees you
Yep.
up to be like, well, I don't have other people's expectations. I don't care about them enough to like weigh me down of like I'm not waiting to get patted on the back to get my next, successful level. It's like the drive that Capricorn has, I think Aquarius has too, but it can go even further because it's not bound by the tangible earth. It's and maybe it's able to do that by carrying all the sorts. When you were talking about groceries, I just imagine like if you use plastic bags and you have too much weight in it, like how the bags will like cut
Yeah.
into your fingers, just like this guy right here.
Mm-hmm. That's such a
But
good point.
you know but if I can carry it into my house and just deal with it and get it over with, then I can get back to the book that I'm writing, or I can get back to the phone call that I need to make this phone call. I need to get all the groceries in the fridge so I can make the phone call. It's like just having that impetus to like get through things faster so that you can keep climbing and keep growing and keep being the wind that you are. I feel like is just an Aquarius blessing. So
Yeah, it's like it's a doorway of sorts. It leads us
mm,
into the decans of Gemini, right? Which is so mutable, so flowing. And to get there, it's almost like we have to be moving through that space to welcome that in. And
mhm,
yeah, not necessarily doing it for maybe the recognition or the praise, which is not a problem, but Leos are often motivated in that way. Like they want
mhm.
someone to say good job. And I think Aquarius want that, but they don't need that. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, like it's in service of whatever the vision is, whatever the ideal is, whatever it is that they're trying and dreaming up in their minds. And it's like, okay, well, if I can just get one step closer to that, then
Mhm,
that's how we accomplish whatever it is we're trying to accomplish. Right. And so there is that distance. And I think distance is such a Saturnian thing, right? As being the
mhm,
furthest visible planet from us. And we see that throughout all of the decans in Aquarius. And the first one, it's, the distance between you and the people that maybe like hurt you or you got in an argument with or where there was conflict with. And the second one,
mhm.
there's distance between you and what you knew. And here there's that new distance between you and everything that is ahead of you, as well as what came before. And
Yeah.
so there's all of these kind of ways that I think that like there's a separation that shows up here. But in doing that, you're also I think able to keep going, motivated to keep going. And there's no choice really. Like you got to
Yeah.
keep putting one foot in front of the other, even if you kind of have your hand and your eyes back on what you left behind.
Yeah. Yeah. The one thing I want to bring up about this card is the card in itself feels like it feels like of two places because he looks like he's doing something nefarious, right? He looks
Mm,
like he's doing something covert, but it's so bright, it's so sunny. And then to have the star and the moon, it's like, yes, we can see, the moon in the daytime, but the moon's realm, she really shines when all is dark. And so we have these, two major arcanas that like really do shine in the darkness, and yet he's doing something that feels like a dark activity in the middle of the day. And just that foil of light and dark, and what's the motivation here, getting away with things in broad daylight. And there's a freedom to that, and freedom is a word that is often given to Aquarius because they are on the other side of the fence that Capricorn is happily maintaining. Like they are free, outside of the expectations that they feel other people put on them, or that other people do put on them. And so there is this freedom of like, of singing your own song. And yes, you
mm,
might look back on the two swords of what grounds you to your own society, or your own, what you left, but you're carrying forward. Like these are actually the ones that I want to bring forward. I want to bring the ones that only aid me in this freedom so that I can move forward, and not the ones that pin me down.
yeah.
Maybe they can be anchors, but what I might be doing might seem odd to you that I'm doing it in the middle of the day. It can be just like sexual expression, or outside of taboo. It can be things that other people would assume you should do at night, but you can like have the freedom to express and be exactly who you are in the middle of the day, regardless of what those social norms are. And I feel like this one, it might be feudal, it might be like, well, we're going to hang you now, depending on what, century you were born in. But it's like the freedom to do that is what Aquarius 3 can like show us of like, you are not as bound as you might think that you are, but you are the one that gives your own. It's like the Ganesha lesson. It's like the Ganesha is a remover of boundaries, but you were the first boundary to be removed. And Aquarius 3 can kind of help us, just remind us of that we aren't as bound as we might at first seem.
Yeah, and I think that's so perfectly kind of distills where we came from to where we are, right? That first decan of Aquarius being
Mm-hmm.
Saturn, Venus, and now we're Moon, Venus. Saturn being what is binding, and
Yeah.
the moon being what is almost like liberatory or free flowing or
Mm-hmm.
movable, changeable, right? So there is this kind of journey that's like, okay, now you realize, like, yeah, you aren't necessarily as tied to all of these things that you once thought you were. And yes,
Mm-hmm.
there was a journey that had to be undertaken to get to this place, but now you have this new knowledge and you can move forward with this knowledge in a way that hopefully frees you in some capacity and also grants opportunities for relationships to come into the picture, for you to connect with other people, for there to be more love and joy and creativity and all of the things that Venus wants to bring to the
Mm-hmm.
table too, right? So it's like we get Venus in both, but the Moon Saturn kind of juxtaposition is really interesting to dig into when framed in that way that you were saying of like what was binding us is now no longer. I feel like
Yeah.
it's so distilled in those two rulers.
Yeah. We didn't talk about the moon card that much, so maybe we can close with the moon. We can watch the moon set. We have the moon as the high priestess, and she has the cloak behind her is reminiscent of the cloak that Venus wears, and they're of the same sex. So I like that connection with the two. It has like pomegranates, very beautiful, fertile pomegranates and palm trees, a really ornate cloth behind her. The rest of the cloth is very plain, and she looks like she's just dressed in water. She has a blue cloak around her that just pools at her feet that looks very watery. It looks like little waves or little puddles, and then a crescent moon at her feet with a crown of sorts. Almost looks like the three phases of the moon,
Mm-hmm.
the crescent on either side and the full at her head. And then there's two pillars, black and white on either side of her. And then beyond, you can just see barely beyond her that there's like a watery realm. Is there anything that you want to add to the high priestess here?
I think that was a perfect description of the card. I think to me, this card often really speaks to hidden knowledge in some
Mm.
way, shape, or
Hmm.
form, like the kind of stuff that isn't necessarily meant to be shared, but is meant to be kept within,
Yeah.
like the esoteric versus the exoteric. And to me, this is like a card of really, yeah, like investigating the mysteries and
Hmm.
realizing that like what can be revealed in the dark of night is not always what can be revealed in the light of day, and
Hmm.
that both are valid forms of knowledge. And sometimes, not everything is meant to be shared, right? And I don't know why, but that's just what I always like when I draw this card. I often think like, oh, it's not necessarily a day to like go out and do a bunch of stuff with other people. It's more of like a
Mm.
time to like spend in quiet and solitude, reading, exploring,
Hmm.
adopting that like curious nature and trying to figure out like what am I supposed to learn today?
Yeah.
In some way. That's kind of what I always think of when I pull this card.
Yeah, I think of it in the context of like being in a foreign place. So you live in a different country than when you were born, but you
Hmm.
can look up to the same moon. It's
Yeah.
like the moon kind of reminds us of home and, other people. If you're in enough, if you're connected with in enough hours to someone that you love, you can both go outside and look at the moon at the same time, and it's such a lovely like connector to home. The moon
Hmm.
reminds us of home and the body that we were carried in the womb and all those things. I mean, as a kid, I grew up and would watch the moon, and I thought that like the moon was like my first friend. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
astrologers have that. Like as a kid, my dad built my sister and I a bed that was like met foot to foot, and it just was at the level of our windows. And so we would lay there at the level of the windows and we would just watch the moon rise over the marsh. And like, to
Oh,
me, the moon was like my buddy, and I would just watch the moon change. And throughout my life, whenever you see the moon as a kid, and even now, you're like, the moon, like, it's like,
yeah.
we're always surprised. It's like the moon is always there, the sun is always there, but we're never like, oh, do you see the sun? Like, it's there right now in the sky. But the moon like brings us joy, and it connects us, and it reminds us. And I just, in the context of the outsider, the traveler, the refugee of the Aquarius decans, I love the moon here as the reminder of wherever you go, there you are. Maybe it's not your
Yeah.
home, but it's your home right now. Like, everything's temporary. The moon is there to remind us, and we're never as far apart as we might think that we are. And just that foil of the moon being so comforting, but the moon being so far away, that I just feel like it's a nice little, it belongs here fully to me, to be there for Aquarius 3. So
Yeah, that was beautiful. I love that. She is like our friend, our mother, right? Like I
mhm.
look up to her, I'm like, Mom, like
Yeah, yeah.
and she's always, yeah, just a source of light, right? And I think that
Hmm.
that's a big part of what this card is that there's always a source of light. There's always something you can connect to, something you can hold on to, even when there is darkness or futility or, devastation or whatever it is that Saturn might be speaking to.
Hmm.
There's the moon and there's Venus, and together those cards are so much about connection, so much about
Yeah.
what we can bring to relationships and how we can open ourselves up to be vulnerable, to bring love and laughter and beauty into this world. And this card seems, when you look at it, like you don't think of the moon and Venus, I don't think, right? Like you think of maybe Mercury being like a little bit of a trickster or something like
Hmm.
that. But when you kind of peel back the layers, you see how, there is a light here, right? The whole background is yellow. It's like there is something that is luminous and bright and joyful. And I think that that's what this card or this decan ends up seeking is how do I find that joy in this new place? How do I create a life
Mm.
here? How do I build connections and relationships in this new place? And in a way that feels supportive of everything that I've gone through, supportive of my weirdness and my eccentricities and all of that, right? It's about trying to find the acceptance that I think was missing in the first, decade too.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, like, even bringing your own tradition to the new place that you are. There are
Yeah.
people, I'm sure, that are around you now that know a little bit more about your home country because you've brought it, you've been that messenger to them. And, the same, like, whenever you go to another country and you bring it back home, like, my Venus is in the ninth house, and I
Mm,
love to travel. And that's where I find, that's where I find home, and that beauty of home is like seeing how other people live. Like, I just melt. I have Venus in Cancer, so that adds to it. But I just melt to be in other people's cultures, and I love to bring tiny little trinkets back so that when I see that little tiny trinket, I can immediately go back and remember how it felt to be in that little holy well in Ireland and hear the donkey braying. I just immediately drop into it because I'm like weaving those my own worlds and those worlds back and forth, and like being the messenger piece of it. Like, to me, that is like why I travel, isn't to
yeah.
like check things off a list, is to like submerge and to be in these places that other humans exist in, and to see how they celebrate and see how they mourn and see how they eat and see how they journey around. To me, it's like it just infuses connection and love into my heart because of my placement. But it's just like I'm there to kind of reflect back, and like the lunar quality of reflecting that, light exists, and we just reflect it with all these different mirrors. The moon is just a very big mirror. It's like it's a singular shared light, and it's just like how we reflect it. And I think traveling itself helps bring really freshly dusted mirrors to be able to reflect that light that we all see. And Aquarius is just such like a great honorary traveler. I love the story of these seconds. So thanks so much for being here and sharing it and sharing your own placements. I'm going to go back just to the three here. So maybe people now have an appreciation for these decans, or these cards. If you pull them in spreads, you might not know what to do with them, or you might have already, entrenched assumptions of what these cards are. So hopefully this conversation has helped just provide an outsider's perspective, which, is Aquarius coded. Um, with that, do you want to share a little bit about your work? Back the spotlight back on you. What are you doing? What would you like to tell people about and how to get in touch? And I'll put all of this in the show notes so you don't have to like write it down. I'll just put little nice easy clicks. But yeah,
Oh, thank you.
share with the world what you're working on right now or what you've what would like to.
Yeah. I mean, if you don't know, I have a guidebook on the DECANS. So it kind of goes through all of those and explores the stories of each of the 36 faces. And so that's something that I did a while back, but I think I am always returning to, always doing more work with in some new form. I've got a lot of different guidebooks. I also just put out a, fifth and 11th house workshopping guidebook with Meg Keene, which is called Finding Fulfillment. It's all about how to find joy and happiness, creativity, pleasure in your life through the fifth and the 11th houses. And so that was kind of my big project of the moment. And now I am trying to be projectless for a time because as we were talking about with the Aquarius 3 thing, I tend to be multitasking way too many projects at the same time. So I'm trying to not do that right now since I just wrapped that last one up. But there's always more coming from me somewhere, a guidebook, a lecture, you can check out my website. You can follow me on socials. I'm at Kira Astrology on most places, either with one Y or two. And yeah, you can book consults with me if you're subscribed to my newsletter and all the usual stuff. Everything can be found on my website, kiraryberg.com.
And I will plug for you your patron page on your website since you didn't do it on your own because I joined a couple of years ago and Kira has some amazing lectures on there that are helpful and I re-listen to them all the time. Like the patron page is great because you have like one spot you can go to and just for zodiacal releasing, like zodiacal releasing is a complicated thing to learn. And even when you think you learn it, listening to your lecture is always helpful of like, I forgot about that. It's like this like peeling, it's not peeling back an onion, it's like peeling back petals of like a ranunculus flower. It's like so beautiful to slowly unfold. You can only unfold a little bit at a time before you just go down all these rabbit holes. So just for the ZR lecture alone, it's worth to be a patron on Kira's page. It's not Patreon, it's on her website. It's a patron page on her website. So definitely go to her website, check it out. And even if you try it out for a year, it's well worth, it's not that much money. That's the other thing is like your stuff is incredibly affordable, which isn't always the case with a lot of like very talented astrologers. I like that you have I like that you have a paywall because you value your work, but it's not insurmountable, even if you are on a budget. So I'm just going to plug that for you because I definitely feel like it's worth the investment.
That's so sweet. Yeah, I put a lot of time and energy and love into that. And I'm constantly writing new articles. It's where all my guidebooks go to get born. And there's monthly elections and there's all of the things, 5 different lectures, and usually adding more every once in a while. And yeah, it's thank you for plugging that. That means a lot to me. I feel like it's a big part of what I do and I don't talk about it enough. So it's nice to know that someone's enjoying it. So thank you.
Well, it goes back to that, like, it's clear when Capricorn publishes something, because it's like evidential, but like when Aquarius says, it's like, do you realize this has been existing this whole time? Like, so, maybe it takes the earth signs to like reflect back on like, there's actually something tangible and that you can get out of it because the Aquarius just puts it out there and then they go, multitask to do other amazing things.
More
so
things.
it takes us, to reflect that light back and forth. So thanks again for joining. I'll put all of your contact and everything in the show notes. And thanks so much for just talking about Aquarius with me.
Thanks for having me. It was great to be here.